Ciao lovelies, Lenaria here, and today is going to be a fun-filled day full of learning. But seriously, today's actually going to be a video where I'm going to be teaching you guys some stuff because I got a request on my last video. I asked you guys to request if you want to see the Agere FAQs, and Nicole said yes, that you guys would want to see that, and I do think that it's a good thing to do because I know that some of my audience is here for like doll stuff and doesn't know what age regression is, so I think it'd be great to kind of spread some knowledge. So that's what I'm trying to do today. You know it's serious when the glasses come on. So I've got some questions here that are like frequently asked questions about age regression. I'm going to be defining age regression, talking about regressed headspaces, the difference between nostalgia, kidcore, and age regression, dispelling some myths about age regression, talking about like what are like just basically how things are different for each person, stuff like that. So sorry, I gotta clear my throat, gotta get serious. So the first FAQ, like really the biggest question everybody has when they don't know about age regression is simply, what is age regression? And so I've got a lot to talk about. I actually wrote up a little script for this video. I'm going to be following it, but I'm going to also go off of it if I have something to add. So, age regression is when somebody reverts to a childlike state of mind, often as a coping mechanism for things like PTSD, depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues. In other words, age regression is when someone mentally returns to a previous headspace, usually that of childhood. Lots of people have regressed without even realizing it, or have regressive thoughts or behaviors. Even children regress at different developmental stages. What I mean by this is everyone at some point in time has had a moment of regression. It doesn't make you an age regressor, but it does make, like, it's a lot more common than people realize. Like when you're sick and your thoughts kind of change to like, oh, I want my mom, like that's a regressive thought. When children have sleep regression, when in different developmental stages, that's regression still, technically speaking. Now, there is a type of therapy for age regression that involves hypnosis. I'm not well versed on this type of therapy. I don't do this. My age regression is a coping skill. It's not a therapy method. I used to think it was called therapy, but then I did a little bit of research and found out that age regression as a coping skill is different from age regression as therapy. So the coping skill is what I'm going to be talking about today. Sorry. The coping skill is when a person reverts back into a child's mindset. And this can be voluntary, involuntary, negative, or positive. Voluntary regression is when someone can ease themselves purposefully into that mindset. What I mean by this is you can isolate the triggers that send you into a regressed headspace and use them to your advantage to cope with things like stress, depression, PTSD, trauma, anything like that. Involuntary regression is when you enter the regressed headspace without meaning to regress or enter the regressed headspace. And of course this can happen because maybe you get triggered because you see something that reminds you of your childhood, and not necessarily like a negative trigger, but maybe it's a trigger that says, hey, this thing is like really comforting for me, and then you regress. Or maybe it's you get stressed out and your response is to kind of mentally regress and get afraid. So involuntary regression can fall into essentially you just don't mean to regress. And then a positive and negative regression are also different. Positive regression is when you regress and when you are in that headspace things are positive or happy. So either they're happy or you're content at the very least. You're not feeling very negative and down and sad. When you are regressed, you are not feeling bad in the headspace. That's positive regression. Positive regression is helpful in contributing to mental healing. Positive regression is what we look for, what you want to do in terms of the coping skill, and what people, like, that's what purposeful regression is usually aiming to do, is to ease somebody into a positive regressed space. Negative regression is when one is feeling these negative emotions when they are regressed. Sometimes people refer to this as impure regression. I prefer to just call it negative regression. It just makes more sense to me. But negative regression essentially is when you get through the regressed headspace and instead of feeling calm or better, instead of feeling happy, you just feel something bad. That can be anger, stress, sadness, fear even. Regressed headspaces don't always mean that you're happy, because regression isn't always on purpose. Okay, so hopefully that cleared up a little bit about that. Let's go into the next question. Is age regression inappropriate in any way? So, no. There are a lot of misconceptions that people carry about age regression, and unfortunately a lot of people assume that it has sexual connotations, and it doesn't. like the biggest thing I can stress about this is when you are regressed, you are mentally in a different state of mind. You are like a child essentially mentally. You do not have the mental capacity to be doing anything inappropriate. So age regression, not inappropriate. Do you need a carer to regress? Not at all. Some people assume that when age regressors regress, it's because they have a carer or because they want to have a carer. That's not always the case. A lot of regressors just don't have caretakers or caregivers or whatever you want to call them. A lot of regressors choose not to have caretakers or anything like that because they just don't feel like they want that in that headspace, and that's perfectly valid. You do not need a caregiver to regress. Is there an age that's too young or too old to be an age regressor? No. There's a lot of no's in this one. So, as I mentioned earlier, even children have regression in their developmental stages, like sleep regression that I talked about earlier. There's also sometimes the issue of like food regression and stuff like that, where children just have these regressive states. They're not doing it on purpose, but it happens. But to be a regressor is to use this coping skill as a coping skill, or to just regress involuntarily sometimes, or like to have this just as a thing that you do. Whether that's voluntary, involuntary, positive, negative, whatever, that is what makes an age regressor an age regressor. There is no age that's too old to be an age regressor, and I don't believe there's an age that's too young to be an age regressor. I mean, unfortunately, people can be like having issues that they need to cope with at young ages. I mean, the levels of like teens who are depressed now is skyrocketing, and so unfortunately there's a lot of reasons people regress, and sometimes you don't even have to have really a reason to do it. You can just regress if you're stressed out. Like, it just happens. Alright, this question is a specific question that I got on the last video, and I wanted to answer it because it means a lot to me that somebody asked it, and like, honestly, it means a lot to me because this is like I think this is an important distinction. Is there a difference between like nostalgia and regression, or like kidcore and regression? So, okay, let's talk about kidcore first. If you've been on the internet recently, you've seen the big trend towards kidcore, which is kidcore is an aesthetic. But regression is a coping skill. Regressors can enjoy kidcore, but kidcore as a whole is an aesthetic, and aesthetics are more for like fashion, decor, stuff like that. Aesthetics are not coping skills. They can become coping skills, but as like the base definition of it, it's an aesthetic, whereas regression is a coping skill, and the capacity that I'm talking about it now. As for nostalgia, enjoying things from childhood is super common, and it doesn't make one a regressor automatically. The main thing that makes somebody a regressor is when you enter into that regressed headspace, meaning that your headspace is different. So just enjoying things from your childhood and like enjoying like throwbacks, stuff like that, doesn't automatically make you a regressor unless you're entering into that headspace. So I will talk about that next, because that's my last question to talk about actually, is what is a regressed headspace like? This is a little different for each person. Again, the subtleties, the nuances, all of it's different. But a regressed headspace at its core means that a person is in a earlier headspace or a younger headspace than what they currently are. So what I mean by that is, like, take for example me, okay? I am 22 years old, and when I regress, sometimes I regress and I am like, I mean, if I had to put an age on it, because like the last video I mentioned, I don't have a specific age range when I regress, but like say I regress sometimes to what I would consider to be like a tween age. So sometimes I get really high energy. I like things from the 2010s era. A lot of that music is very fun. I'm very fond of a lot of that music. I get very hyper, and I wanna like, I even dress a little differently in that headspace. I act differently in that headspace. My body language can subconsciously change. I mean, everything that I do can change. Even my vocal patterns can change. And so regression really is something that when your headspace changes, it really does change. It's not that you're just pretending, you're not like purposely, like you can purposely make yourself enter the headspace, but you're not purposely acting the way you're acting. It's that you are in that headspace. So, fun times, learning times. I hope this video helped you guys get a little bit of an understanding of age regression and the coping skill part of it anyway. Like I said, I'm not versed enough to know about the therapy method, so I can't really talk on that, but the coping skill itself I am very well versed in. I have been one for my whole life essentially. So alright, so that was my Agere FAQs video, which I'm probably going to title this What is Age Regression, because that's just easier for people to figure out. Hope this video helped you learn something. Please remember to stay awesome, love yourself, and if you haven't already, please subscribe, because I would love to hopefully hit 1K by the end of the year, though I don't know if that's going to happen. But either way, I'm just happy to have more people in the community, and I'm happy to teach people about what age regression is. So stay awesome, remember to love yourself, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye, lovelies!